the book and sunnah are safe and saving. Safe and saving. Salvation. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى في المحكم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها ولا تعضلوهن. I'm going to stop at this portion of a verse. It's not the complete verse because otherwise we'll be here for about 3 days. And this portion, 4 or 5 words of the verse is going to keep us in maybe 45 minutes. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who believe, لا يحل لكم, it is not permissible for you, أن ترثوا النساء, that you inherit women against their will. ولا تعضلوهن, and you cannot do عضل. تعضلوهن means you cannot keep them hanging. This is my best explanation. Again, English is not my first language, so keep that in mind. I'll come to it. We'll explain it, and that's the best way. Before I go to the ayah, I'd like to put you in the atmospheres of the Quran, because that's very important to understand the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Civilization is 2 parts. There's intellectual civilization and there's materialistic civilization. Yani, if we call civilization as hadara. I'm not talking about Fukuyama's, the clash of civilizations, nor about others. We're going to touch base on these things, but we're not going to really go into this. But civilization entails an academic and a fikri, intellectual civilization and advancement of the human being. It also entails, another part of it, a materialistic advancement, tangible advancement that's non-intellectual necessarily of the human being. Islam obviously came to move people, transition them to a higher or at the highest level of civilization per se, intellectually, and then open the doors and give them the keys to every other civilization that serves the human being in life. How so? Because Islam as a message is a message to give every human being, regardless of background, hope, growth, and opportunity, regardless of faith. Islam came to afford every human person, every human being, regardless of faith, background, ethnicity, color, hope, growth, and opportunity, in that it came to deliver happiness to humanity, and therefore it gave humanity the courage and the encouragement to advance. Number 1, obviously intellectually, and number 2, open the door for any other civic and any other materialistic advancement, scientific advancement, all these civilization. See, Islam doesn't necessarily view that every single materialistic civilization or scientific advancement as civility. How so? A scientific advancement could include discovering or making a nuclear bomb. That's a scientific advancement or discovery that does not lead to civilization per se, that Islam sees. You see? So Islam came to give that openness to civilization. Let me explain that a bit further. You see, the difference between the intellectual and the materialistic civilization can lie in a simple example. Because civilization or civility doesn't necessarily mean moving the human being from living in a cave to now living in a nice house, air conditioning, and beautiful marble, and these things. That transition from a cave or from a tent to a palace made of bricks and marble and stones Islam views that as a good move, but that does not necessarily entail civilization. Civilization doesn't mean necessarily that you move from riding a camel or riding a mule to riding a Jeep, Range Rover, 4x4. Well, both of them are 4x4 if you look at it anyway. I mean, the mule is also 4x4. And it's environmental friendly, by the way. What I'm trying to say is that transition from the tent to a palace, that's an easy transition. Anyone can do it. You can go to the caveman and say, Mr. Caveman, I'd like to take you from this cave and put you in a palace. I don't think he's going to say no. The problem is not in the transition in the materialistic sense from a cave to a palace or from a mule to a car or to a plane. Anyone can do that. That's a very easy transition. The true test of civility is the advancement of the human intellectuality and humanity and civility within the human being. That's what Islam came for. It's easy to move to a car from a mule, but it's oftentimes difficult to abandon thoughts and ideas that precipitated generation after generation after generation after generation. People are not willing to unlearn and relearn. That's a challenge. And therefore, when we look at the human sort of movement from the beginning of time until now, yeah, sure, we moved from the cave and now we live in homes, and we moved from the mules and now we use cars and trains and planes. But in that human being, there's still old precipitation of pre-Jahiliyyah, if I may say, to a certain extent. There's still those instincts, if we want to call it the beast within the human being. Obviously, there is the lower form of life and the higher form of life. Well, Quran al-Kareem was Sunnah al-Sharifa came to encourage people to aspire to maximize their human potential. And I always say a good Muslim is a good human being in the first place. How can you ever be a good Muslim if you're not a good human being? There's no way. There's a contradiction in terms. Because a good Muslim is foundationally a good human being and a positive human being and a contributing human being, genuinely to the well-being of humanity, not only humanity, the well-being of the creation. Just a few things so we can sort of put ourselves in the frame of the book and the Sunnah. Therefore, when Islam came now, so let's leave the cave and the dinosaur age. Yeah, because, in the age of dinosaurs, if you're too slow to adapt, you're going to be extinct. That's right. And the example of the dinosaurs is not just a movie. If you're too slow to adapt, you will go extinct. It's just a biological, or let's say, a scientific rule. Remember that thing, the bird, the dodo? Too slow to think and to move. So they ate him up. Al-Islam came in a very critical time. The civility of what we call the Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah means the era of the great ignorance. That's what Jahiliyyah means. Comes from Jahl. Jahl means ignorance. The Jahiliyyah, we call that, Muslims call that, for the era before Islam. After Isa alayhi salam, before Islam, there was era of the great ignorance, or what we call Jahiliyyah. Okay. There's a civilization, if you want to call it civilization. In other words, set of values in the era of the great ignorance. Islam came to contradict those sets of values, or that civilization came with Islamic civilization that contradicted head-on and clashed with that quote-unquote civilization of the Jahiliyyah, or the era of the great ignorance. And that's why when we look at An-Nabi Al-Akram sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, it's not about moving some people to be just simply living in a city called Madina. It's not only about teaching them that cleaning themselves and cleanness is part of this deen and this faith. It's not just about telling them that smile if you have nothing to give, if you can't give, you have no money to give charity to the needy, if you have no effort to give, if you have no time to spare, then at least put a smile. That's part of a positive contribution. But An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam caused a massive intellectual transformation of people, from people who used to have a value of burying their own children when they don't have money to feed them, to people who actually stand up out of respect and love to their children. There's a transformation there. The transformation is simply, especially when it comes to women, there's a set of Jahiliyyah civility, so-called civility. Again, things are relative. That if you, at that time, 2,000 years ago or so, or more than 1,450 years ago, if you have a baby daughter, then you take her and you bury her. That's one scene or one picture. Now fast forward a little bit and you'll see An-Nabi Al-Akram, Rasulullah, Sayyidul Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen, Imamul Muttaqeen, Imamul Rusul, Sayyidu Khalqillah, Khairul Alameen, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, stands up himself, wa huwa Sayyidul Khalq, when his daughter Fatimatu Zahra walks in. And he kisses her on the forehead. One narration, she kisses his hand, and he asks her to sit in his own seat, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. See, there is a saying that we all know that says, actions speak louder than words.